excellence. My name is Chris Hornbecker, and I'm with Agility. I have to take a minute to thank all of our sponsors and the people that paid for all the event today. As you may know, all of us are volunteer speakers. We come in, and thanks to this group, they pay for lunch, facilities, all of those things. That's about me. I'm not going to talk about me. If you want to see that, you can look later on the presentation slide. Contact information for me, Chris Hornbecker at Agility. This is my Twitter handle. If you want to sit here and tweet, the hashtag is SPSDC. Somebody may be doing that to be easy on me. There's also my LinkedIn address, and connect with Agility on Facebook if you would like. I do see a bunch of familiar faces, so I appreciate you guys coming to support us. About Agility, just a couple quick things. We've won some awards from Microsoft for customer satisfaction experience. We're headquartered in Reston, Virginia, and our specialty is building on the .NET and SharePoint platforms. We wouldn't be Agility if we didn't specialize in agile development. So that's we're going to learn a little bit about how we can use agile in the federal space today too. Our customers range from Fortune 50, from people like Duke Energy, CVS, clear up to the federal government. We have probably one of the largest deployments in the federal government. It's a 100,000 plus seat deployment of SharePoint. So as we talk about some things today, we'll talk about some things that are special to really large federal SharePoint deployments. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the issues facing federal agencies, getting buy-in from leadership, how agencies are using SharePoint, and then we're going to talk about some certain things that we have to consider when we're doing SharePoint for the feds. First, we're going to talk about, before we get into how we build this model, let's just chat a little bit about how SharePoint helps face, or it solves some of the issues facing our federal agencies. Obviously, the first thing that we have is better, faster access to relevant information. Before anybody goes crazy, I'm not picking on Obama here. I have a little note here. All I want everybody to think about here is, what happens in your agency when information doesn't travel fast? I'm not going to talk about political affiliations, but I do want to show this because we see what happens when information, doesn't travel fast. We have people in the back here making assumptions about his character. Second, if you're in a leadership position, you may start second guessing, why in my agency I don't have this information this quickly. And third, really, if you mess up really bad, somebody and you're in a high spot, somebody makes a caricature of you and puts you in the Washington Post. So we don't want that to happen. Last, SharePoint is also being used in the military. I've heard Navy mentioned. We know it's used in the Marines. I know it's being used in the Air Force. And if people are out in the field, in the theater, and systems don't work, information doesn't travel fast, people can die. We have lives at stake. So really, what I want to help you guys do today is figure out how we all go, deploy SharePoint and make the world a better place. Second problem we're trying to solve is institutional knowledge capture. So, as we look at this thing, I joke around and it says 4 more years. We look up here, we see 13, 14, and 15, and 16. In 3 more years, it's just not the big guy on Pennsylvania that gets to retire. There are 750,000 other feds retired that are eligible to retire by 2016. That's an unbelievably large number. Imagine if at your companies, you walk in tomorrow and only 4 out of the 10 people in your work group are there. Some of you might be pretty happy that a couple of them might not be there, but overall, we would probably lose, a good bit of institutional knowledge. Reducing cost. It's obviously a general theme going across government right now. I looked at the top graphic, and up there it looks like it's Republicans' fault. The next line I see it's the Democrats' fault for all this budget deficit. The funny thing is I probably pulled up 50-some different diagrams. None of the numbers matched. It depends on where it comes from too, they're blaming. But it doesn't matter really, which side you're taking. The reducing costs is going to be a theme. If you're, we have private contractors in here. If you're building proposals, reducing costs is going to be one of your #1 win themes across this. Everybody's trying to figure out how do we save money with sequestration. And the continuing resolution of 2013, we've had $85 billion slashed out of budgets. A quick scenario of one of my customers is They're a regulatory agency. About a year and a half ago, new regulatory actions were filed, so they had to build IT systems to support those. Because of the CR, they now have to go back to budgets and a financial situation from before the regulatory agents were being passed. So they have new work they have to do, and the money's being cut back to the funding levels of before that work was issued. So that, it's serious, it's happening across government. We have to figure out how to serve the public more efficiently, more automation, other things. Another big theme across government is visibility and transparency. And I have a whole list of things, and I just said, forget it. At this point, we're talking about everything. The president put a statement out there that he wants this site created because we can go online and see how the money's being spent. Whether we believe it or not, and maybe that's really how it's being spent, maybe it's not, but the thing is they're trying to create transparency into everything that they're doing. More importantly, recovery.gov was a Drupal failure, so I'm happy to present that. And version 2 came out on SharePoint, so it was it was claimed and deemed a resounding success by the people who did it. But the financial reports came out. The first one said they're wasting their money. Drupal's not going to meet it. SharePoint met the needs. And the last most important theme that we're seeing across most of the proposals that we put out there is anywhere, anytime access for workers. We're seeing that the public wants to be able to work from anywhere. We're seeing remote teleworkers. And another think tank that built this graphic, the total savings is $5.4 billion from allowing government workers to work from home or contractors to telework. I'll talk about, just to review the issues, we talked about better, faster access to relevant information, institutional knowledge capture, reducing cost, visibility, transparency, and anywhere, anytime access to information. And that's all cool from the SharePoint perspective, but we start to talk about getting buy-in from federal leadership. The money's in the mission, not in the IT. So we have to start thinking about how do we solve, support, and enable the mission. That's whether if it's DHS helping to provide better homeland security, whether we do it in interior, helping protect the parks, our natural resources, other things. And I'm sharing that also with the contractors out there as you're writing proposals, trying to win work. Make sure that you're looking at the mission, not just what cool stuff SharePoint can do. So whatever you do, and the theme here is, whatever you do, don't show your boss this picture. All it will do is confuse them. They'll start looking at all these things. I could sit here probably for 2 hours and explain each one of these components to you. But if you show that to your boss, you're going to slow your SharePoint adoption down. They're going to get confused. They're not going to know what this thing is all about. So the next thing we'll do is we always say, what do we say SharePoint is? And really, it's a portal platform that allows us to provision all kinds of solutions. And all these types of solutions are online management, sharing, collaborative applications, web portal applications, data reporting, and dashboards, and some of these other things you think. Anybody doing any kind of really cool SharePoint solution out there that's not mentioned here? It doesn't fall into one of these categories, just because I'm interested in hearing about it?
I've seen a lot done with GIS space.
So the next thing is really, how do we get started? We're going in, we're talking to a federal agency, how do we get started building this model? Because there's certain things in federal agencies that kind of prohibit procurement. We go in and we talk about this, we have a great idea, but it may not be what we've talked about by the time it gets through the whole procurement cycle. Have you experienced that? So some of these special considerations when building a federal center of excellence for staffing and procurement, certification and accreditation, governance and security, how do we share or not share information? Staffing. I feel like this, 2 days a week when we're getting called, because I get called all the time and somebody says, I need a SharePoint resource. So as many of you know, SharePoint, there's not really such thing as a SharePoint resource. SharePoint takes all kinds of different talents to make it deployed or to build a collaboration center of excellence. We need much more than just, a SharePoint admin. And it's interesting, I can tell a quick little story. One time I got called and they said, well, I need somebody who can do Visual Studio, and they've had to have Visual Studio SharePoint experience for 10 years. Well, at the time, that wasn't possible. This is the government procurement challenge. Nobody could have been doing SharePoint.NET Object Model development for 10 years. They wanted them to be able to administer team sites for somebody. And on top of it, they had to have the ability to run backups on a weekly basis. Yeah, so I laugh at that because anybody who has the skills to do .NET Object development, and they've been doing it for 10 years, probably is not going to want to sit there and run backups for somebody. So, if there's anything to remember out of this, it's the one size doesn't fit all. All of this list here is the different types of resources that we need when we're building a center of excellence. We need BI data experts if we're going to do dashboarding or reporting solutions. If we're going to plan on customizing SharePoint, which we may or may not do, we're going to need developers that understand the object model, understand JavaScript, other technologies. Possibly a SharePoint architect that's seeing what's going on in all the projects and figuring out how do we share information. Business analyst is key. We typically, our business analysts are people who are not only business analysts but also know InfoPath or SharePoint Designer to do workflows or other things. Project managers, and that's the one side of the realm. I often like to push Scrum Masters. I'm a big believer in Agile development. SharePoint projects are like delivering mail; they're never done. We always continue to find ways to get people to collaborate or improve business processes. And program manager, obviously, operations and administrators. Certification and accreditation. Quick show of hands that understands or knows what that means, ever heard these words? Okay, so in SharePoint, as we talk about certification and accreditation, we're talking about how do we get this thing certified to put in production in certain federal agencies. Certain federal agencies have a little bit higher level of certification and accreditation, and it's really based upon do we go out of the box or not. I've been in some agencies where everything's out of the box and they draw the boundary around the SharePoint system, says anything that can be done out of the box. I've been in other agencies that will not let you compile any type of solution, deploy it as a sandbox solution, deploy it in the GAC, do anything unless it goes through a full CNA process by itself. This is important as we think about this, as we build governance plans, because if we have too large a boundary, we obviously have issues with security. If the boundary is real large and let people do whatever they want, deploying solutions, they may modify, break other people's solutions, going back to the mission at hand in the beginning, people may lose lives. There's also a costly expense in managing an audit. We chatted a little bit about the process to get it out there. And if the boundaries are too limited, I've seen people get crazy creative with getting around the rules. I've come in to fix solutions at agencies where we were told we cannot deploy any custom solution, but the prime contractor sold it knowing what SharePoint had capabilities and looking like, but didn't understand the agency's needs. And when people have that type of creative, I've seen people build, take the whole solution that could have been built using the back-end object model and compiled code. And in one agency, I saw them rewrite everything in JavaScript to mimic and generate all the screens to make it look like SharePoint, even though it wasn't SharePoint. And ability in the system. So, as you're going out there and you're working in the Fed space, think about what are the governance rules, what does the IT department say about what you're allowed to deploy and what you're not allowed to deploy. So, this is just a fun slide. It just talks about the power of SharePoint is our ability to deliver things out of the box, but also, be able to build custom code and make this thing do really whatever we can envision. In doing that, we really have to think about this model of how do we, manage our requests for sites, applications, and governance with a shared resource model. So, real quick, in some major proposal efforts, we built this model. Everybody got it? All right, we'll move on now. One more time. Yeah. The 5 most important things about doing this. 1 are solution-centered SMEs. And as we get into the SMEs, no more shameless promotions, but we are still looking for great SMEs. If you know anybody interested, send them the Xgility. SharePoint SMEs in the Solution Center skills matrix. We talked about all those different skill sets that are needed. Often I talked about somebody says, I need a SharePoint resource. I also see federal agencies coming out and they say, we have a procurement and we need a SharePoint person. Well, I'm going to encourage you as you go back to your agencies to talk to people that a variety of skill sets are needed to deliver SharePoint. It's not a single role. So what we like to try to do is if we go in and there's a big enough procurement, we try to get a bunch of different peoples with a bunch of different skill sets built into this solution center as SMEs. You know, there's administrative work at lots of agencies, including Justice, CFTC, Eric's an InfoPath specialist, does a lot of design work and other SharePoint things. We got Nick over there doing .NET, and Jeff's a site owner who configures sites for people. By having this whole group of different people, we're able to basically manage the whole full life cycle. But by putting them together as a group and using an agile type process, the request can come in and you can farm it to the resource based upon which one's available. If your budgets don't support building out a team to do this, plan on paying a whole lot of money for one person that has more skill sets than you're going to need. So that's really kind of the concept behind our solution center. The next part is really developing a governance board. In the federal landscape, a governance board can help you with really a whole bunch of different things, figuring out what do we want our goals of our collaboration system to be. More importantly, they can help you figure out how do we make a decision. Anybody ever been on a SharePoint project where a decision can't be made or how we're going to do something? This presentation is on the federal space. Anybody else? Because I didn't see many hands. So the governance board, what we typically do is build rules on how do we make decisions as a governance board. If we build rules on how we build the rules and everybody agrees on the rules and the way we're going to play in the sandbox together, when they don't like the decision that gets made, it's a lot easier for them to swallow. So we think of things like team process agreements, deployment guides, all kinds of things that we put together as a governance board. This governance board also can help deployments because it can help do the adoption. So the governance board might be key personnel from, you know, for example, if we're at Interior, it might be key personnel from all the individual bureaus. You know, that's a much larger agency, but you know, we want to make sure we have the people around the fringe represented to come in and participate on the type of solutions that we're going to build. Typically, we'll also have some input on prioritizing a master backlog of projects. So as we fill up this solution center with a couple different types of SMEs, different roles, we then like to go and figure out a way to build a master backlog and prioritize those based upon what type of roles available next. And also based upon, so again, we're Xgility. I'm a big believer in agile development, thus the name. Because SharePoint is a type of solution that's really never, we'll say never done, and it goes into an O&M phase that we really have some trouble differentiating. Is it development? Is it configuration? Or is it just operations and maintenance? You see and stuff like that where people are saying, well, I'm not really sure what kind of project this is. Should it be, you know, site administrator setting stuff up, or does it require InfoPath, and is InfoPath really development, or is it out of the box? So as we funnel all these things in, we typically set up this master backlog because then we can have a lot of different solution types flow through a master backlog. Again, we might build things that are out of the box, we might do things that are just workflow applications, or we might do full-blown .NET apps. Borrowing from the agile processes. Anybody familiar with Scrum in here? Awesome, I'd love to see that. So I won't go too detailed into here, but you know, the solution center, we built this master backlog, we define what type of solutions we're building. Are they out of the box, are they custom, are they just workflow apps? Assign those into sprints. The sprints get done 2 to 4 weeks, rinse, repeat, do it again. I encourage everybody, let's make lots of mistakes, let's make them really fast and correct them. If we go into the old waterfall model, I'm not a big believer in the waterfall model. I think you do all your planning or your requirements, you do this development, and you get clear down to here, and it's not what the customer wants. So, master backlog, in dealing with the agency, we try to capture that in mission language or user stories that relate to the mission, not technical terms. We let that serve as our high-level prioritized list of initiatives. Important here, getting together with either your COTAR or your leadership and make sure you're reviewing that master backlog on a monthly basis, making sure that SharePoint is providing the value that it's supposed to the organization. And as we come up with backlog items, we look at the people we have available in our solution center, the SMEs, and prioritize based upon mission value and the availability of that skill set to develop that next solution. I usually come into a project, I tell my core, my COTAR, they're there to do two things. Get impediments out of my way, and don't let me step on political landmines. Other than that, let us handle the technology. We're all SharePoint professionals, we know this technology. Get rid of the impediments if we're using an agile process, and they can help get rid of those. Your SharePoint project's going to be a success. Tools to support agile project management. This is a list you might want to take a couple notes on. Obviously, the first is SharePoint. We wouldn't be up here promoting SharePoint without saying that we could build a simple master backlog of items to track in SharePoint. For those of you that have done some custom SharePoint development, even just configuring lists, you can build your own master list to assign some items to sprints, track them, build some simple reporting mechanisms in Excel. This book up here, Pro Project Management with SharePoint, is a really awesome book. It will teach you a little bit about agile development. It'll also teach you a little bit about how to customize SharePoint if you're new to SharePoint. I think it's a great starter book for just about anybody. Visual Studio Team System is one of my favorites. Again, maybe the former developer part, but Visual Studio Team System now has a web front end, and it also has a completely hosted model that Microsoft's released. So the next major thing about trying to aggregate all these people into a solution center is really so we can try to figure out how do we do best practices in code reuse. I don't know how many times, and I'm going to give you a quick example of an agency that I worked at. We work at centralized agency level, Department of IT. They have a bunch of individual groups around them. All the individual groups around them, I said before, the money's where the mission is. So most of the budgets all happen to be out here on the fray. It's great for service providers because we have 10 people to sell to instead of one. Unfortunately, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So you have two people under the same agency building a very similar type of set of solutions. I see more laughing going on. This is fun today, huh? So we have, in order to try to stop that, if we try to aggregate people into the solution center, we mentioned that solution architect role. The solution architect role is really to evaluate the backlog, see what we're building, and potentially see, you know what, I knew that we built a solution over here for a different part of the agency that we might be able to reuse 50% of the code. So there's real value in having this solution center of excellence model with an architect and SMEs and a governance board. It can kind of centralize and help disseminate sharing of information of what's going on with different SharePoint projects. And in order before you became a site owner, you would have to go through a specific training, sign off on the governance docs that you read them, and go through site administration owner training. Just a quick aside, I've seen organizations that haven't done that. I got pulled into an organization about 2.5 years ago that took SharePoint. They had no governance plan. They thought they were going to be really neat and take 2010 and just deploy it on test servers. And all of a sudden it went viral through the agency. No governance plan, no security, and you could do a search. And when you did a search, things like social security numbers and PII data would come up. So, last thing, a couple notes on the O&M solution delivery team. Typically, if we go in and build a model, we see different procurements. Maybe there's a procurement out for who's going to come run our SharePoint platform. There might be another procurement out for who's going to develop the application. It's important for all these teams to talk talk together. But just as important, it's important that they're not the same team. An O&M team might support some of the various resources assigned to the O&M for specific periods. I like to see that developer resources have to do some O&M at some point in time. If you're responsible for keeping the lights on when you go out and do other things like be a developer, you're a little more conscious of the governance plan, not building things that might not be quite as secure. I can pick on admins today. Steve's not here. You okay with that, Robbie?
Sure thing.
So, as a developer, Steve always jokes and he says, his job is to keep the lights on, mine are to make them blink and make it look flashy and cool. But it really is important that you have tight integration between the teams. Our admins locked everything down so hard we never have a solution, so no one would be able to use it. These people in and out, it does allow for some cross-training. They're not always going to be, developers might not be the happiest doing admin might not always have the skills to do some of the deeper things, but they understand the different sides. It's easier to write a governance plan when you're an admin and understand why you might have to not allow things to be deployed to the gap in a SharePoint solution, or maybe you have to because there's some mission need that we have to do some things. We want to create collaboration and knowledge sharing between these groups. The other really important one on here is risk from member attrition. We're all SharePoint professionals. We're in a hot industry. We're all in demand, which is pretty awesome. Everybody thinks that's awesome, right? So, we're going to have risk from team member attrition from time to time. If we're sharing and collaborating and working together and using agile processes, hopefully, people are cross-trained against different skills and then they're not only doing one single part of the solution every time. The O&M team should not be responsible for sole .NET development. I say this because I'm actually looking after one of the guys' paintings in the back who does a lot of everything. If you're responsible for answering tickets and doing Tier 1 help desk or doing other things, it's impossible to assign somebody to also be doing development. It's two different mindsets. When you're in code looking at things, you don't want to be interrupted every 30 minutes by tickets coming in. And I see too many federal agencies make that mistake all the time. It's like, oh, we have SharePoint people, we pile them all together, it's just all one big blob, there's a new fire, we set them after this. Try to keep your development teams separate. Well, they can communicate and integrate, but try to keep them separate as far as the tasking level when they're actually doing the work.